The world is complex, the Bible is complex. Human existence is a tangled ball of experience, perception, and understanding. Ravel is a puzzling word, denoting both a tangling and untangling. This podcast attempts to hold honest conversations in good faith. Some ideas expressed in this podcast will be challenging. Others will be obvious. When a PhD in biblical interpretation and a habitually podcasting man-child discuss matters of society, scripture, and scandal, you get Ravel.
Hey everybody, you are listening to Ravel, and it's me, your best buddy Basil. And with me, as always, I've got the sanctified, the steadfast, the defender of the faith, Dr. Christopher Ryan Gates. How's it going,
It's
pal?
Me.
It's a me.
It's a me, Doctor, not Mario.
Dr. Mario.
I actually graduated with a guy whose name was Mario, and he took that as a moniker, Dr. Mario, when he finished his PhD. So he actually goes by that, by Dr. Mario, his first name, not his last name. So
That's so cool.
Yeah,
He's
fun.
living his best life now.
yeah, just throwing pills at people and,
And defeating the lizard man.
the corona.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right, Christopher. Now, we've got a fun episode today. Fun. Remember,
Fun.
it's fun.
Is the adjective you use.
Yes,
Yeah.
Chris. We've got I feel lucky, I think, to be able to have a platform where we're able to talk to such fellows as the one that we talked to today, and that is Jay Bakker. Now, you may recognize this name. Maybe it's triggering some sort of latent memory hiding in the recesses of your brain, or perhaps not. Perhaps he's right at the front of your brain. But you might know Jay Bakker. He's an author, a quote-unquote pastor, as he lovingly puts it, a podcaster, he's all sorts of things, but most people will probably recognize him as being the son of Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker. That's right. And if you don't know anything about that, you can just Google it, or you can watch the new film, The Eyes of Tammy Faye, which is a film that came out recently, sort of describing the whole experience. And we don't talk too much about the incident that is the sort of scandalous nature of the latter part of his parents' career, or the mid part. I don't know how it falls in chronology, but what the family, for better or for worse, is sort of most known for. But we do address it. It is hard to not address it. But, look, this show is about society, scripture, and scandal, and we are really bringing the scandal with this episode, not just because of the sort of Bakker story, but also the fact that Jay Bakker, again, has reached a sort of at least tongue-in-cheek level of self-described heretic, which could not be disputed after this conversation. Chris, you seem a little shook. Are you shook, as the kids say nowadays?
Yeah, I'm literally shaking. I think that's how it goes.
No, you're not.
No,
you mean
I'm
that's what the
not.
kids say?
That's what the kids say.
When they are
yeah.
figuratively shaking, they say they are literally shaking.
Right. Everyone's literally doing things that they're not actually literally doing.
Isn't that life, though, Whoa,
it is,
it's deep, bro.
But yeah, it was an interesting conversation. Only knew of Jay Bakker just kind of loosely before the conversation that we had, which you all are about to hear. and he kind of came out with, made a couple claims about some things that I was like, oh well, these I vehemently disagree with. So did my best to keep my opinions to myself and give our guests the floor as they are the guest, but also felt compelled to kind of jump in and talk a little bit about those. So
he's very open and makes no attempt at disguising some of his strongly held, what would traditionally be considered heresies. And I had a delightful time, Christopher, sitting back and experiencing you act in your core competency and give a little pushback to this fella. So that's fun. There will be a little bit of that. Kind of sneaks up on us.
Well, I just want to, as I was thinking about it, we had on Dr. Future. Both of us were a little bit like, I wonder what people will think about this. We were kind of wondering what people would think about political differences. And we got through that. I didn't think that was too bad. Then we had on Dr. Peter Rollins, and we kind of wondered about that. And I thought, well, that was more philosophical, so it got pretty abstract. But here today, Jay Bakker makes some very concrete statements that for me, I was like, whoa, this is much more. These are not just simple differences of opinion. It becomes pretty important as believers. So yes, stepped in, kind of said some stuff, but didn't want to turn it into a debate, didn't want to turn it into a
did we walk the line? Did Dr. Chris walk the line of debate and conversation? But I think, again, in a delightful way. And I think it's worth mentioning that, that this was, Jay did not have all the time in the world. We had a limited amount of time with him. And so we had to resist the urge to turn it into a, full-fledged debate podcast, which would have needed much more time to do that correctly and to give the adequate amount of, respect that a true debate would deserve, instead of just like a quick, let's truncate this all and, have to make assumptions on what the listener already knows and things like this and not be able to fully lay out an argument in this short amount of time. So that sounds like a fun thing to do, but we will need more time to do that. And Jay has so graciously made himself available in the future if we wanted to have him back on and do something like that.
So it's a perfect opportunity to, use the disclaimer, the one that we make before every show, and then a similar one that comes on. The views expressed in this podcast are not necessarily those of the hosts of the show. So just to cover myself and to put that out there, while there may be things that may go kind of unaddressed and uncontested, certainly the fact that he's appeared here on the show does not necessarily mean that we agree with everything he says, whether or not myself or Basil made any kind of retort about it. So,
which should mean something to you listeners, because we've had plenty of people on the show that we disagree with and have never had to give such a disclaimer.
Yeah.
So I think people understand, whoever's saying the thing is the one of whose view it is.
Right.
But, so indeed, buckle your seatbelts, because this one is a fun, wild ride. But here's the thing. It's not all that. There's much more than that in this conversation. We talk a little bit about scandal, talking a little bit about some heresies, a little bit about the death of God, a little bit, and thankfully, more than just a little bit of some very authentic words and feelings from someone who really, if anybody can claim a hard time being in the church, Jay Bakker is definitely at the top of that list.
For sure.
Of course, being the son of Jim and Tammy Faye and everything that, the rap, the reputation, the everything wrapped up in being the son of a pretty notorious, couple in the church. There's a lot there, and he tells us a lot about his experiences during and after that type of thing on a personal level, his journey through the faith, of course, informed by that experience, and actually, some really delightful moments of honesty and vulnerability that I find very valuable, and I think you, dear listeners, will find valuable as well.
Yeah. If you feel compelled at any point to turn it off, just hang in there with us.
Just wait a little bit longer.
Hang in there. Comes around at the end, and kind of the model of the show is we are open to conversation with anyone and people who would disagree with us, and we believe that we have something to learn from every person, whether that be conservative Christian, an atheist, Republican, Democrat, anything like that. You have something to learn all the time from people. So we ask that you, listen to what he has to say. Fascinating perspective on things, and particularly towards the end, I think is where really anybody, no matter who you are and what you believe, will find something that will really, I think, kind of resonate and kind of hit home with you. So,
amen. Okay, well, I think we should just jump right into it, Chris. Here with us, we have Mr. Jay Bakker. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for your time. And, we will have mentions to the beautiful listeners out there, a little bit about you, but for some reason, I feel more compelled to let you explain yourself and what's your problem type of thing here at the top. just so we all.
Wow.
This is
do you feel welcomed and comfortable?
I do, yes. What's my problem?
This is a new.
I've got a lot of those.
I thought it would, I'd start out in a way that maybe you're more familiar with being referred to. But it's my new thing, I'm kind of going for a new vibe in 2022, which is like sort of aggressive confrontation with friendly acquaintances. It's kind of a new year, new me thing. No, I'm just kidding. Jay, how you doing? Thank you very much for being here. And
you're welcome.
My understanding is that you're enjoying the sort of California surfer dude lifestyle right now.
Yeah, I'm out visiting Pete Rollins, my best friend, and we're hanging out at his place in LA, and it's very nice. I live in Seattle, Washington, so it's nice to kind of get away a little bit.
Yeah.
I have my kids. I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, so I have my kids about 50% of the time. So I just had a few days to get away and
decompress.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good for you. So you're located in Seattle now. I've seen a lot of things about you being in New York, but you know how the internet is.
Well, I mean, I haven't been in New York in 8-9 years, I guess.
See how good I am at internet research about our guests?
That's okay. Yeah. What have you? That was probably where we kind of hit our stride was in New York, and then I moved to Minneapolis for about 7 years. And
oh my gosh, you're all over the place,
that was a tough town to make it in, but moved to Seattle about a year ago. So
yeah, that's what we all know about Minneapolis. It's one of those towns that'll chew you up and spit you out.
Well, I just learned that for the first time.
It's very progressive in a lot of ways, and so when you kind of come in with like kind of that vibe, you're there. That job. A lot of people feel like that job's already taken care of. Get a lot of Lutherans out there.
God, yes. Okay, famous hub for Lutherans and Lutheran adjacents. All right, we skipped a part. Who are you? What are you doing here, Jay?
Well, my name is Jay Bakker. My best mate Pete Rollins referred me to you guys. most people know my parents are Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker, and I grew up with a lot of tough life, a lot of scandal, a lot of judgment, a lot of brokenness. I am a self-taught person, so all my theology and philosophy all comes from just reading books and being curious. I ran a church, which we actually more or less call community now, but for, almost 23, 24, whatever 1994 was, years since then. And it's evolved over time as my studies and life has evolved. And so, yeah, so that's, I do a weekly podcast. We actually been doing podcasting since before it was called podcasting.
Ooh.
Yeah. I remember we would record it to cassette, and then my friend would go and put it on his computer. And I was like, I don't know about this. And he's like, it's the future. I was like, okay, if you think so, just put them up there. And yeah, so we've been doing this since I was in Atlanta, which was, almost 20 years ago. So been doing this a long time, and I've written 3 books. I love theology and philosophy. I love people, and so that's why I do my job.
That's awesome. And your job, yeah,
good luck with that.
your job, some people might call pastor. Now,
yes,
I've in my 5 minutes of internet research I did before we started this call, I think it may not surprise you that a lot of the articles written about you from, loving, good Christian people put pastor in quotation marks.
Yeah, no, I like that. No, I've actually, we for a while, we put Revolution Church, and we put the church in quotation marks, because I've seen it done to me so many times.
Yeah.
And, and people who want to argue on Facebook, they'll do that too. They'll put church in quotations. So I embraced the quotations, thinking, man, this is hilarious. And
wow.
So, yeah, so I love those quotations. I'm not comfortable really being called a pastor anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of that has to do with the COVID stuff and having to move the whole thing online. But I also feel like there's so much around that now it's kind of my time to return the favor of everybody putting quotations around. Just being what, maybe you're right. Maybe that's not the more I understand theology and philosophy, maybe that's just not the word for me right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so, this sort of what I've gathered from talking to you just a little bit, and just the sort of weird sort of cultural data that can be collected is there's an interesting mixture between you being defined by external forces and also a healthy amount of self-definition. So it's interesting to actually speak with you and get a chance to, experience the intersection between the definitions that the world has put on you, and then the definitions that you have created for yourself in no different of a way than the rest of us do.
Well, that's what everybody does,
Yeah.
And for me, it's I don't really care. I grew up really into punk rock and punk rock ethics and things like that. And I still feel those really deeply. So for me, it's people can put definitions on me all day, because ultimately that's, what they want to see, but it's not ultimately me, there was a movie made about my mom with Jessica Chastain playing my mom and Andrew Garfield playing my dad, that came out a few months, last year.
Yeah, it was very recent. What is it called? The Eyes of Tammy Faye?
Of Tammy Faye.
Yeah.
And I went to the premiere, and I had some people get angry at me because they're like, oh, you're endorsing the film. And I said, I'm not endorsing anything. I wanted to go to the premiere because I thought it was a good celebration of my mother's life. And I wanted to get a chance to talk to the people involved in it, So I can make, I can do things
As if seeing a movie made specifically about the legacy of your mother is something that you wouldn't go attend.
Yeah. So, I mean, I had seen it before, but I guess people didn't think I talked negatively enough about it or whatever clips they heard, and for me, it's like, my life is too short. And when you have, young kids and, you're trying to help people redefine how they think and bring people together who think differently. I mean, that's my work, is trying to bring people, a diverse group of people together in a way of diverse thinking, and so I'm trying to bring people together. So that's my thing, is like, that's my truth and that's where I live. And, if my parents helped me get a book, or my parents helped me get my work out there, fantastic, and I'm grateful for that, but there's also a lot of baggage that came with it. So
totally,
it's definitely paid for it. So
it doesn't make it any easier. Yeah. Well, what's fun is I think we have similar missions in that, part of our, I don't know, goal is kind of a weird word, but part of what we like to do on this show specifically is to bring, a diversity of ideas together. Just, if nothing else, simply for the opportunity for people to have kind of a direct contact with thinkers and thoughts that they just wouldn't have direct contact with usually, and leave it up to them to sort of parse it out.
Yeah, and if you get people to even question their belief system, it's not necessarily that needs to change, but it's just that they'll take a deeper look at it, hopefully. It's always my
come
hope
out stronger.
And we learn how to argue better, because when I argue with people and I argue well with people, I learn things about myself, because, they'll say like, well, why do you feel that way? And you have to go like, oh yeah, why do I feel that way?
Because
like,
my pastor told me to.
Yeah, that's what my pastor said.
Uh-huh.
So I have to, sometimes there's things you're like, oh, you know what? I probably need to take a better look at that. You know, you kind of like, oh, I grazed over something in a book and now it's the truth, and so you got to go back and research it and look at it and understand it. So I think that's what's probably got me in the most trouble in my life and with my career as early on, especially as a pastor and running a church, is that I really took deep dives into things, so I can sit down with theologians and argue with them and have good conversations. And
I notice how you didn't mention podcasters. You didn't need any of this extra study to sit down with podcasters. That's okay. Good thing we have.
Well, sometimes, I mean, I've done so many different types of podcasts and radio shows and television interviews, and the thing for me is like doing podcasts. It's usually treading over my family's life, and for me that's fine. But I'm really passionate about my work and what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to communicate with other folks. But I can also relate on that level that a lot of that comes from personal experience as well. It's like, I know what it's like to feel scapegoated by the church. I know what it's like to, everybody gets angry at the church and then yells at me. And I'm like, guys, do you not realize what my background is? I've even actually been asked to leave conversations where people were like talking about how hurt they were by the church because I put a different perspective on it because I was coming from the pastor's family, and they didn't want to hear that.
Right.
Right now, the pastor was the scapegoat. And so I was asked to, this happened on, I think, Twitter. I was politely asked to leave and told I was not adding anything to the conversation.
Surprise.
From someone who was a therapist, and so I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'll just go off then, thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to just get some stuff out of the way because I have this sitting here in front of me and I'm realizing it's completely useless. So I'm going to run through my 5 minutes of internet research and just name some headlines. And then we can move on.
Yeah, fantastic.
So this one was fun. Pro-homosexual Pastor Jay Bakker denies Jesus' atonement. We can.
Whoa, where's that one from?
Oh, nuts! I just closed the tab. Let me pull it up again.
That is fantastic.
Yeah. So we're gonna have to get you saved here on the show, brother. Let me find.
People are listening to the things that I talk about. That is like kind of out of context in a way, but it's really cool to somebody like at least kind of grab something like in the wind,
something at least something you could have a discourse about.
Yeah.
Do you know what that was in relation to? Would you care to?
I will.
Well, no. I mean, I've been gay affirming since 2006 or 7. So I did it kind of before it was popular. And
what is the denial of the denial of the atonement?
The denial of the atonement is that I don't think that we were Jesus. I don't think Jesus needed to die. I don't think that was what the main focus was. I think we needed to have Christ's life. I don't think that God needs punishment or blood sacrifice, but I think that was the best idea of the Jewish understanding of the time. And when your Messiah is all of a sudden killed, there's got to be some reason why your Messiah was killed when you thought he was going to actually rule on earth for a long time. So I think it was a best understanding, but I don't think the death of Christ is necessarily the most valuable thing in the Bible. I think what the message and what it creates us to be good people is what's very valuable. But I'm also a very, very big minister of grace, and I believe in grace. But as Paul would argue, grace came 450 years before the law through Abraham. So, you got stuff like that.
So it's a fun sort of rhetorical way that you explain it, because we have had the conversation, Chris, that, God could have chosen to do it anyway. God could have chosen to, redeem humanity or reconcile humanity to himself in any way that he wanted. He's God. He's, very capable of that. And yet he chose to do it that way. And Chris, I'll let you respond.
Well, I guess I wasn't too familiar with your specific theology, but I'll just we're not gonna turn this into any kind of debate or anything here, but I'm just can let you know that I come from a much more conservative sort of camp where all of the pretty well traditional sorts of ideas about the church I affirm, not because of tradition, but because as I myself have studied the text of Scripture, I believe that the church fathers and the church has had it right for a good majority of time. So I'm not here to try to debate you on any of those things. But I do. It is curious when you talk about the that it seems almost like you were saying it was just kind of like the Jews were taking what happened and then kind of writing that into the scriptures, like, well, this is what happened to Messiah, so this must have been kind of accepting it, not because that's how it should have been, but because that's how it ended up being, and not that that was the plan of God. But I don't know if that's exactly what you're saying, but you have.
Do you believe God? Do you believe that God's a man in the sky?
Well, not a man.
Well, do you believe God's a thing in the sky? A being in the sky?
Is in the sky the key modifier here?
No, but I'm just saying, we probably have very different belief systems of what God is, and we probably have very different, ways of understanding how Jewish tradition worked and how the Jewish writers wrote, So for me, this comes from understanding Talikian theology, philosophy, studying Hegel's work on when he was working with theology. So these are just concepts that I've had that have come from in-depth studies, but also realizations of, to me, it makes no sense why God would need an atonement, especially when Abraham's faith made him whole and pure within grace, and that grace was given 450 years before Christ died. And so that grace has always been. And so my idea is that Christ came to show us who God's true nature, with God's nature, and what grace is. So, that's just me. But yeah, I'm glad that you feel that way about the church and you think the church has got it right. I think the church probably hasn't gotten it right for a couple thousand years.
Well, I don't think I'm not going to say that on all of the social issues and the gay affirming. That's another subject unto itself, and the certainly the outworkings of some of the church's beliefs in society throughout all of time, the way that the church has interacted with the world. I'm not saying that they've gotten everything right all the time, but as far as our theology has been preserved through, starting with the church fathers and then going on all the way through the history of the church, there has been a consistent sort of understanding and a voice. And when we move too far outside of the bounds of those sorts of things, I'm certainly okay with nuances in understanding. But when it comes to substitutionary atonement and things like that, I realize that there is currently a discussion about that and some pushback. I'm simply saying for myself, I don't find a whole lot of warrant if you're taking the text of Scripture to be the divine authoritative word of God.
Do you believe there's forgeries in the Bible?
It depends on what you mean by forgery, but I believe that. Well, I mean, what do you mean by forgery?
For example, like pastoral epistles were written not to support Paul, but to clean up Paul's work.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that. If you're talking about James and that sort of thing, I mean, that is an interpretation of it that I have heard before, but I don't think it would be to clean up. I think you're kind of getting.
So you think that Paul decided just later in life to reset up a hierarchy structure in the church after he had said in Galatians, which is probably our earliest New Testament book, that there's neither male nor female, Jew nor Gentile, there's no hierarchy or lowarchy, but then all of a sudden he decides to set up a hierarchy within the church?
Yeah, we actually just talked about that on an episode that we just recorded where he says that, and that being a reference to a Jewish sort of something of a proverb that the Jews would recite every day. I'm sure you're familiar with it if you've gone into this sort of discussion, but where the Jews would wake up every day and they'd say, "I thank you, I was not born a Gentile, a slave, or a female, a woman," that sort of thing. So in him saying that, it's not dismantling that system. What he's actually doing is coming against the Jewish order of the time, because he was writing that specifically to Judaizers in Galatians.
Well,
and that actually was
it's and the people from Galatia that were not Judaizers, Gentiles as well. It was written to the whole community. So
yeah, well, the Judaizers were clearly the ones that he was addressing the teaching from the Judaizers that was coming into the Galatian church. But
right, well, I no, because he was also trying to create peace there. He said, you guys have got to be aware of biting and devouring one another. So he's actually equalizing the hierarchy and the lowarchy and saying, there is no archy. You guys are all one in Christ. You're all one. And he's trying to make it clear to both of those sides, I think, because I think if you really pay attention to Galatians, you'll see that he's trying to rebuke the Judaizers, but at the same time, he's trying to relate to them and remind them that he is one of them. And he's also arguing with James in that. You think that James is the person who says, oh, yeah, go ahead and reach the Gentiles. But then all of a sudden, James comes around with his people, and now Peter is no longer eating with Gentiles. He's only eating with Jews. And so he has to show that he has to rebuke him in order to do that. So, I mean, you see somebody who's really trying to also prove themselves as an apostle. I mean, he's trying to show that his cred is there. But I would completely disagree with the idea that he's not tearing down a hierarchical system. I believe that Paul actually becomes more inclusive. And I think that if it was up to me, the pastoral epistles, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, and Titus would be taken out of the Bible.
Ooh. So you don't affirm the full canon of Scripture?
No.
I'm not being confrontational or debating. I'm just making sure we understand.
I do not.
Okay.
I truly believe they're forgeries, and that's not a new idea.
Yeah. Okay. So this is good.
It's reactionary. I mean, it's reactionary, Paul, and I believe it was to try to make Paul safer. Most even conservative theologians would tell you that those books are not written by Paul, but written in Paul's name.
Oh, not most conservatives.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah,
we'll disagree on that. We could go through and see who could come up with the most sources, but I wouldn't say most. But
that is known as reactionary Paul or pseudo Paul.
Yeah, I'm familiar. I'm familiar with the school
And
of thought, but I wouldn't say
and
it's the
I've
majority.
sat down with a lot of, maybe not the majority, but I've sat down with a lot of conservative people who go, no, but it was allowed to be written that way in that time, and it was accepted in the canon, and you're allowed to write in other people's names and things like that. So, I mean, I've seen the gymnastics that people do to make that work. If you just look at the simple mathematics of the English and all that stuff and how the words are put together, it's really, that words are in those books that did not exist. And I can't remember the words right now, but after Paul had passed away, I mean, Paul would have been dead by the time those books were written. So that there's a problem there. And the problem is that I can't toe the line. I have to be honest. Why did I become gay affirming? Is because I went in and I studied the laws of Rome, the gods they were worshiping, realizing they didn't even really have a super concept of what sexuality was. It was more something that showed dominance, and that when someone was penetrated, they were no longer seen as a man. And it was often done, what Paul talks about, the birds and things like that, are worships to these particular fertility gods. And so what our idea of being gay and lesbian is now is not the same idea as they would have held 2,000 years ago. It wasn't really even a concept. So, you learn to work through that. You learn what priests do and how priests do sacrifices, and that priests were sleeping with young boys and basically robbing them of their manhood and their equality in the in the world. And of course, then you get Romans 2, where Paul says, "What horrible people I'm talking about." Yeah, well, you're just as bad for judging those people. So Paul's a tricky one.
Well, my headline blitz was a fruitful endeavor.
Yeah. Do you have a second one?
I've got a couple more that had a fun punchline, but now that I know that we get to just dive into
each... You guys talk to Pete Rollins. I mean, you guys must have been like crying afterwards. I mean, if I'm crazy, Pete's really crazy, but he's so smart that it's really hard to disagree with him.
The subject of the errancy of the Bible and things like that were not necessarily a topic of conversation.
You guys should definitely have him back on.
Oh, we would love to have him back on.
I'm totally a heretic. I mean, I'm not.
Oh yeah.
I'm not going to say I'm not a heretic. But I will say that I come by heresy in a very true, honest way of studying.
An honest reading. Heretic.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really, my heresy comes from true conviction and from looking at as much facts as I can. Now, I'm not saying that 5 years from now I'm not going to come back to you guys and be like, "Hey guys, I messed that up," because I didn't study everything under the sun.
Sure.
It's kind of like when you do a talk, and everybody's like, "We didn't mention this in that talk." And you didn't, what about this? I'm like, guys, this talk is about this.
Yeah.
There's not, not every talk is a complete talk on theology, But I also say, I will tell you this. There's no book that is more influential on my life than the Bible. So there's no book that's more important to me than the Bible. But that's why I have to be honest with myself about the Bible. And that was a very hard place to go. I did not take it lightly. I cried over it. I suffered over it. I struggled with it. It wasn't just something where one day I decided to wake up and disagree with everything that I had been taught my whole life and what I had studied most of my life. These were things that were really tough to take and tough to hear and tough to study on and tough to look at. But I felt though I was doing people a disservice if I wasn't completely honest about what the conclusions that I came to, and I feel like often, like if you're in a denomination or something like that, if you go outside of their rules and regulations, you're no longer a part of that denomination. And so you're kind of forced to toe a line. And that's why I've been asked to join denominations before and do things like that. But I'm going, my work and my studies bring me to different places. And, I don't know where I'm going to be 2 or 3 years from now for my studies. I can't subscribe to your ideas, even if they're very close to mine. I mean, the ELCA had very close ideas to mine a few years ago. And I wasn't able to really, I just couldn't do it. I've got to be an independent because this is how I've got to study.
Well, I think there's something really valuable, and one thing I'm really appreciating about you, Jay, and the conversation we're having is I do believe that you are unabashedly honest about your thoughts and your theology at this time. It's often that heretics don't want to be seen as heretics. They want to be seen as sort of a reformer who, can influence the rest of the church into, also being reformers.
Well, don't get me wrong. I mean, I believe in Reformation. I believe in reforming the church. And I mean, that would be part of my work that would make me happy to go back and call the church again if we were more open to having these discussions and having good arguments. I mean, that's the good thing here is, we're not telling each other we're going to hell or that we're horrible people. I mean, we're having a difficult conversation. I mean, it's difficult for me to say this stuff,
Yeah.
I mean, you've got a guy who's got a doctorate in theology, and I'm arguing with him. That's not fun.
Well, I didn't.
It's fun for me.
No, I didn't want to. I don't want to argue. I don't want to debate.
But it's good. It's not. Neither one of us really probably do. We'd probably be comfortable more sitting in having a drink. But the fact is if we argue well, even from this conversation, will shape when I go and look back at things. You know what I mean? Like, you know what? He said this. I'm going to keep that in my mind.
Yeah.
Because that's how we grow, through arguing well. We don't grow at all if we don't argue and we don't try to push each other and stretch each other more. We also recognize each other's humanity through conflict, And I'd rather have with conflict than go to war. And I think the problem that the church has had in the past is rather than having conflict, we go straight to war, or we excommunicate, or we kick people out, or we label them heretics, or
well,
instead of having the tough conversations,
The difficulty is that I think people are willing to have the tough conversations, but we started off this show back at the very beginning, and we talked about categorizing our beliefs and putting those into dogmas, doctrines, and beliefs, right? So the things that we believe, you have to identify the importance of those areas. And the difficulty probably for many of our listeners, for myself, even as I'm hearing some of the things that you're saying, that those are in disagreement with things that I would consider dogmas. And everybody has their own dogmas. Everybody has,
of course,
areas that they're going to kind of drive a stake in the ground. And evangelical Christianity, and is essentially through the history of the church, as we've talked about, has affirmed these certain things. We can look back through the faithful transmission of all of these doctrines and say that these are the ones that we are not compromising on. And the thing that is going to, while yes, we all want unity in the church and we all want to agree with each other and be able to move forward for the purposes of reaching the world with the gospel, when you get into those areas that we're going to call dogmas and you start teaching something that someone might call a different gospel, that is when people are going to start saying, I have to pull back from this. And while I can say that I love you and I want unity and I'm for you and all of those things, I can't partner with you in the message that you are trying to present to the world, because I'm affirming these things that are fundamentally different. And I do have to make a distinction. And you find this in the gospel. I mean, unless, you have problems with, the things that Jesus said too, then what he says is I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. I came to divide. I came to separate the truth from untruth. And then it comes down to that point
just kind of like you're separating with me right now.
Well, yes, and that's what I'm saying. I want unity, but then there are things where I have to say I stand separately from you.
I'm not asking for unity. I'm asking you to be my friend.
Yeah, and that's totally. I'm excited at the prospect of it, and perhaps who knows, we may be friends moving forward. This may be the only time we talk. Who knows what might happen? But I'm certainly. I have lots of friends who disagree with me on fundamental issues of the faith that are my dear friends that I love very much, that I would do anything for. So I'm happy to be your friend.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, that's all I'm asking. I'm just saying that we argue well, and that the idea of iron sharpens iron as well. And so the same scripture you're using for that, I can just turn around and use it on you and just say, well, that's why I believe these are forgeries, and we're going to talk about this, and it's going to split us apart, and I have to stand by it strongly, especially since there's so few voices crying out in the wilderness. You know what I mean? So it's like we can go that way, but there also is to the point where we have to continue to educate ourselves and grow, and like you be open to the fact that maybe they are forgeries. Even though the church has said yes this whole time. I mean, who do you follow? Do you follow church? Do you follow God? Do you follow your convictions? Those are the questions you have to ask. It's like that's And if I'm right, then you've got to be able to be open to say that. And would you be open to go into your congregation, or I don't know if you teach or what you do, but are you willing to go and say, yeah, I got this wrong. These aren't Paul. These do seem that way, or am I willing to go in and say, hey, I screwed up, Paul, and
Yeah,
these
no,
are
I'm
Paul.
I'm certainly willing to admit when I have things wrong. Perhaps just not to take up too much of the time with this, but if you want to send me, some of your most compelling arguments, I am more than willing to take a look at them. A lot of them I feel like I have. I certainly have not read everything and have not been exposed to everything, but I'm familiar with general arguments. But I'd be happy to look over any of the stuff that you would want to. And I do consider myself, I think Basil and I, it's the nature of this show. Both of us are, while you're unabashedly a heretic, we are both unabashedly evangelical Christians. And
I think that's, fantastic. And I honestly think this conversation we're having is brilliant. So I'm not shy at all with this, guys. So.
Yeah, I'm having fun.
Praise the Lord.
My headline clip, my headline blitz was supposed to be just sort of to get my tabs off of my browser, guys, and you're not helping me out very much.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. And just to finish them out, just so I don't have to panic about it anymore, just a couple things that popped up was the IMDb for One Punk Under God, an original 6-part documentary series on Jay Bakker, the only son of TV evangelists Jim Bakker and Tammy Faye Messner. So that's fun. I don't know where that's available.
The only begotten.
The only begotten son. Yeah, they really did play that up with whoever did the advertisement for that.
Yeah, well.
I think they called me the prodigal son of Jim and Tammy Faye.
Oh, I'm sure you get that a lot.
Yeah. Me and my dad completely disagree, but in a way that you guys would probably think he's a heretic too, though. So.
I have a surprisingly little amount of firm beliefs about your parents.
But that's the problem with evangelicals, guys. You guys were known, and I grew up evangelical, and it's close to my heart. But evangelical Christians are known more for like dogma and what they're against than what they're for.
I think we can agree on the at least the perception or the presentation.
Yeah, and there's got to be, if you want to save evangelicalism, there's got to be a reformation there, man. It's like you look at people like Dr. King, and Dr. King went and spoke with people and loved people who did not even believe in his own humanity, and he would say, well, they're not the enemy. Misinformation is the enemy, and we've got to have the churches. The reason I don't want to do is there's so much infighting, because we're talking about evangelicals, but I can't stand the progressive church half the time either, because they have all these rules of who's in and who's out. And it's like, to me, that's why I don't call it a church, because I want a place where I can have evangelicals, I can have atheists, I can have, progressive Christians all coming together in arguing well and having tough conversations that cause them to think well. And that's why I love philosophies, because philosophers can come together and completely disagree with each other, but they don't send each other to an eternal oven, or they don't, label each other as horrific. They'll disagree with each other in the books, but they're still able to have good conversations that cause growth and cause us to live better lives and to treat each other well. And this idea of just like, I can't stand cancel culture. But you know what? When I grew up, evangelicals were the beginning of the cancel culture. They wanted to cancel everybody. You know what I mean? They're the ones who said, hey, if you have gay kids, kick them out of your house. I don't know how many evangelical people, broken people I've had to meet with, and how many people I've buried their kids because they kicked them out, because it didn't go up with the dogma. And when the dogma becomes more important than your kids, then I think you've missed God. I think you've missed who Christ really is. And I think you've missed the idea of what love is. Love never gives up, never loses faith. It's always hopeful, and it endures through every circumstance, not some circumstances. And even when Paul said, the guy who's sleeping with his mother-in-law, in 2 Corinthians, hey, all right, I was just seeing how you guys would react. You really reacted harshly. Bring that person back and lift them up and give them grace and help restore them. Be gentle and humble. If you think you're too good to restore someone, you're only fooling yourself. You're really nobody at all. So I don't take this stuff with a grain of salt. I watched my family get turned on by the progressive Christians and by the conservative evangelical Christians. and I've seen what you preach, and I can see what people do. And I see the human nature, and I see these excuses in the Bible to throw people away. And I don't believe in throwing people away, period. I believe grace is for all people, not just some. I don't believe it's predestination and all that shit, and that some people are going to go to hell and some people are going to heaven because God has chosen them, predestined them to do that. I don't agree with that either. Honestly, I don't even believe in hell. Once the more I've studied hell was more of a purifying fire thing understood 2,000 years ago. The southwest, also a place with the southwest of Jerusalem, also another religion that Jesus was commenting on. So, I mean, you've got all this type of different stuff that's just not easy to just say, okay, well, this is it. It's like, it's not it. There's a lot to be talked about here. And people, I just, if I can just make people a little bit uncomfortable, but honest with you, if you say, like, if most of your listeners are very conservative evangelicals or just evangelicals, there's probably a good chance that they'll never open up anything with my name on it again. And that's a shame.
Well, they probably wouldn't have in the first place, which is why we are so happy to have you on. Because,
right.
they can...
But this might be the last, this could be definitely the last time, because I've been marked with the Scarlet Letter.
Yeah. Well, and by association, I'm probably, I get my fair amount of criticism. I get called lukewarm pretty often, which is, lukewarm for an evangelical's pastor kid like me is, that's as worse as it gets.
Well, I'm an evangelical Luther pastor's kid as well. And, I've been called lukewarm, and I've also been called an ear tickler. And I don't think people realize the price I've paid in my own for saying what I believe.
Mm-hmm.
When I became gay affirming, within a week, I had to lay off my whole staff. We lost almost everything. Never recovered from that. Don't have the type of support there. I barely make it by. I live in, state housing in Washington.
Yeah.
So this isn't anything that's getting me rich, or getting me popular, or getting me more book deals. I had more of that stuff when I was more of when I towed the line a little bit more, and
well, it's funny. It's funny you bring that up, because that brings me to my last tab that I had open, which I'm just going to disclaim right now. Is hilarious. When I when I type in Jay Bakker, the first suggested search is Jay Bakker net worth, and I'm here to expose you, Jay. According to peopleai.com, you are worth $8.4 million.
I know. Pete looked that up, and he was like, "Hey, mate, you've been lying to me this whole time." Yeah, no, I never seen $1 million.
So you don't have $8 million.
Awesome.
I was going to say, there's some good work you could do. There is a disclaimer on this website that says Jay Bakker net worth displayed here are calculated based on combination of social factors. Please only use it for a guidance. And Jay Bakker's actual income may vary a lot from the dollar amount showed above.
You'll never see me on Preachers and Sneakers, I'll tell you that.
Preachers and Sneakers.
I mean, maybe one day that would be really cool if I did make it to the Preachers and Sneakers, but I don't think I'll ever be buying $1,000 sneakers.
Well, maybe we can do a Kickstarter for you. That'll be our thing.
Oh, thanks.
It'll be like. Do you disagree?
I want to take care of my kids. That's what I want to do.
We'll make
take good care of my kids.
Every time one of our listeners disagreed with something you said, then they have to put $1 in the Jay Bakker sneaker jar. And right. we'll get you some nice sneakers, bro.
All right, I'll start looking for cool sneakers.
Let me ask a question though, because you had said that what we might have some listeners, and just hearing what you have to say just on sort of a cursory and introductory sort of knowledge of you would never listen to anything that you have to say again. But I'm curious, and I think that people generally do triages in their life. You only have so much time. You only have so many people to listen to. You only have so much. So I could see, giving sort of a favorable perspective to a person who might hear what you have to say and say, nah, I've kind of heard enough. I don't really know that I need to hear any more from that person. Are there people that you would place into that category where you could listen to something that they would have to say for the space of about an hour or so, and you could hear what they would have to say, and you would say to yourself, like, I think I kind of understand where that person's coming from. I think I understand what they're about. And I don't really know that I would ever need to listen to anything that they would have to say again. And I'm asking this not as any kind of like gotcha moment or any kind of like trying to turn the tables on you, but because in our society right now, I think that take politics instead of religion as a divide.
Yeah, no,
so
definitely.
steeply divided in politics, and you can just look at a bumper sticker that somebody has on their car, or a hat that they're wearing, or any other thing, and you can look at that person and very easily say, I know what you believe about the pandemic. I know what you believe about elections. I know what you believe about. Go down a list of things and just say, I don't really have
But
any
of course, we
need.
wouldn't do that because we're called not to judge.
Right.
So how
Well,
we judge? We won't do that.
this is what I'm asking of you specifically. Do you find, is there any category of people that you would look at that you would say, give them a chance, hear what they have to say for a little bit of time, and then say, I'm probably not going to waste any more time listening to what this person has to say. I'm going to, wipe the dust kind of off my sandals here, and I'm just going to continue to move on. Do you think that there's a situation in your life where you would do that?
Probably not not probably in the past 2 years. Before that, definitely. I mean, like, I'll give you an example. I guess maybe I like what's his name, the comedian, the British comedian who now does a lot of really good.
Russell Brand.
Russell Brand, yeah. Like I really like Russell Brand, and I was watching Russell Brand on Joe Rogan, and
he's brilliant. Russell Brand and Joe Rogan, they're both brilliant in my opinion. But
I love Russell Brand, but I just wasn't feeling Joe Rogan, and it wasn't anything like his stuff. I was like, oh, this is not anybody that just this how if I had to choose between one, I would choose Russell Brand. So I had that thought the other day. So maybe that's the kind of thing. But for me, it's also like, no, like I often will read things that I don't agree with, and I used to get attacked a lot by neo-Calvinists, especially like 10 years ago. They were always after me. And so I would just start reading books written by their favorite people, and try to understand it more. I don't like to assume who someone is and what someone believes, because I can't trust the media, what the media tells me. I mean, that's why I like Russell Brand, and that's why I usually get my news from the BBC, and different things like that. It's like, I feel like you have to go deeper in and research things. So I can't, I mean, there are certainly people who I probably hear for an hour, but, I talk to people about not scapegoating, and I mean, when I was talking, when Trump was in office, I was saying, we can't scapegoat Trump. We can't scapegoat all these Republicans. I've never voted Republican in my life. And I was like, you can't scapegoat these people and just say, well, they're all bad, because that's just not true. That's not how it works. And the same way with, like, all liberals aren't good. I mean, it's like, actually, it's kind of a whole really big, bad show right now. And that's why I feel this need for us, for that example within the church, I think is almost as separated, if not more, than the political parties. We're all split down the middle, and sometimes politics ends up influencing our religion more than our religion influences our politics. But my thing is like, this is why I want us to argue well and have really tough conversations. I might hear somebody speak and not be able to meet with them or talk with them, and I might be like, well, I'm not going to like subscribe to their podcast. But if I ever get a chance to sit down with them and talk to them, I would definitely do that. So, well, it's just, I'm just saying, it's just really easy to write people off, and you got to understand where I'm coming from. My parents were the biggest televangelists in the world in the 80s, and I would spend Christmas with my dad alone in prison. You guys we're all called to like go visit people in prisons and things like that. And I watched very few of those people that were on my dad's show or worked with my dad, who my dad was friends with or helped my dad, So for me, I've seen this firsthand. I've seen the hypocrisy. I've lived through it, and I'm at a point in my life where I don't necessarily care to be bitter about it. I just care to say, like, I've seen the writing on the wall. I've seen what, being stuck in a theological box can do to you. And that, I don't see the fruit. I don't see peace, patience, kindness, and love, and joyfulness. I don't see that. And so for me, it's just the type of thing of like, do we know people by their fruit? And factions is the opposite of fruit, having separate groups and factions. And it says, beware how Paul says, beware how you guys treat each other, because you might devour each other. And so it's the idea is like, I don't want us to devour each other. I just want us to be able to communicate. And I say argue well. I'm not even saying we have to talk well, that we have good arguments, and then they cause us to think and grow.
Thank you. I love that.
You're welcome.
I mean, those are the types of things. Most of what you just said, I think, is something that everybody at least wants to want, if they're, being honest. And, you mentioned the experience with your father after all that type of stuff went down. And, I told you before, and I'm kind of still on the train, that I don't want to make this about that story.
Yeah.
But it was, I felt something. I felt something when you were talking about that. And
well, it's such a reality part of my life.
Yeah.
It's such a, it's damage that was done to me and my family.
How old were you at the time?
I was 11 when my parents had the scandal happen, and I was about 13 when my dad went to prison. So
I mean, that's pretty young. I remember being, I'd say 12, 13, that area. For me, as a pastor's kid, it was kind of the time where I was expected, and then subsequently sort of experienced the process of taking responsibility for what I believed, or taking, internalizing, kind of feeling like an adult, 13 years old. You've been taught the ways of the way for your whole life up until that point. And then you start reaching teenhood and you realize like, oh, I can actually think whatever I want, I can actually have some control over this and look into things myself. But it's such a formative time for, I would say, a young Christian, especially, or a young, religious person. Where were you, like, in your faith at the time? And then what sort of catastrophe, what sort of cataclysm could happen? I mean, we've been exploring the concept of the death of God for a while on the show now. And there's a part of it, we've looked at it philosophically and theologically and even legally and, secularly, those types of things. But what I sense when I hear about your age and your experience and your things is, not only would that have been sort of a death of what you knew or what your structure was in life, but also a potentially, death of God situation. I don't want to.
Well, for me, it was kind of the death of the church. It was just how the church reacted, and all churches, like we're talking capital C. It wasn't like the Lutherans came in and were like, we'll visit him and help him. Nobody came. And
you mean to visit your father, or to you specifically?
To visit, to me, to visit my father, to restore, to help, to figure things out. There just wasn't anything put into place to do that. And I mean, the matter of fact, I'm 46 now, and me and you and Chris are all sitting here still talking about it, to give you an idea of how that stuff works.
Yeah.
I'll never have I could swim to the moon tomorrow, and that the beginning would be son of, so it's like, I mean, that's just the reality of it. I mean, that's just human nature, I guess. But, funny thing is guys, is like, for me, what changed my life was reading the book of Galatians and understanding grace. And that's what blew my mind. And I've always studied like an evangelical. I mean, God, I was a proof texter for so long in my studies, and reading Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic and not being able to do it by buying all these different books so I could translate it and understand it. And then studying history, and then, trying to get books on archaeology, that was biblical archaeology, and really doing my best to just understand it all. I've never taken a lot of these things very lightly. I might take them lighter now than I did back then, but I really always tried to like every jot and tittle and and all that stuff, you know. So it's just strange, like, you know. For me, a death of God moment happened actually just a few years ago after I had read one of Pete's books, and I was just gone through my divorce, and I was really at the end of my rope, and I was in the shower, and I just did not feel God. I was trying to cry out for God. I just didn't think God was there anymore. And then all of a sudden I realized Christ on the cross going, my Father, you know, why have you forsaken, or no, God, why have you forsaken me? And I felt very close to Christ at that moment, because I did not feel God, but I understood that place of crucifixion. Mm. And something came so alive to me in that moment. And it was the closest I'd ever felt to Christ at that moment. And so for me, that was a really big turning moment, just in my Christianity. But it wasn't like God died or anything. I kind of have a concept of God as exists and does not exist at the same time, but that's a long discussion that we don't have time for. But yeah, so, you know, that was probably the closest to my death of God experience, was that, you know, Christ almost becoming an atheist on the cross, feeling the lack of God and feeling abandoned by God. And at the same time saying, you know, forgive all these people. They don't know what they're doing. You know, like, Dad, if you're there, you know, don't hold it against them. And I think that's kind of a really beautiful, insane moment to have. And like a moment of despair at the same time, still worried about those folks, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that meant everybody. I don't think that just meant Jews. I think it meant, you know, the Gentiles and the Romans and the government, and, you know, the people who actually, you know, it was the Roman government that killed Jesus. You know, Jews didn't have that type of pull. They could influence, but, you know, not that much. They were, you know, living in, you know, occupied territory, you know. So
yeah.
I appreciate you having a moment of vulnerability with us, and I hope that what that does for anybody who may be just gnashing their teeth at you, as we've been talking so far, gives them the opportunity to have some compassion for a person that they might tend to disagree with, and I appreciate your vulnerability there. I feel inclined to ask, though, as we started off this conversation, and you saying, you know, pretty openly that you are, you know, a heretic, and obviously has different definitions to different people. We kind of understand what you're saying, a little bit tongue in cheek there, I think, as you would actually define it yourself. But I wonder how much of your childhood experience, and I'm sure spending a lot of time with Peter Rollins, you know, the psychoanalysis, and all of that your childhood experiences must come to bear quite a bit on how you have developed as an adult and as a Christian, a believer, however it is that you might categorize yourself. How has that experience with your parents kind of informed your heresy, if you'll accept it in those terms?
What's really interesting is, you know, when I remember sitting down with my mom and telling her, you know, like, I'm going to be gay affirming. I'm coming out to tell people that I don't think this is a sin. And she was like, could you just not say it? You know, she's like, maybe you could just live it and not say it. And I said, Mom, I'm like, you know, how many people, you know, do you think felt convicted to help, you know, civil rights issues, but were afraid to say it? You know, I don't think it's right for me to be silent on this, you know. And this is Martin Luther King quote that says, it's not the words of your enemies people remember, but the silence of their friends, that really pushed me on that. And I said, well, Mom, I can't. And she goes, well, honey, I love you, but I'm really mostly worried that the church is going to destroy you, you know, and that you're going to lose everything, and they're going to do what they did to us. And I said, well, Mom, I said, I know I know that's all probably going to happen, but I have to follow my convictions. So I think, if anything, what my parents taught me, and even what the evangelical church taught me, is to follow my convictions. And when you feel something so strongly and you feel that you've come to that place that you have to speak out and you have to say something, even if it's not popular at the time. And it wasn't. I mean, I spoke at Christian festivals. That's how I made my living, besides my church, is I did Christian festivals, and, all of those got canceled within a week. You know what I mean? It was like, there was no place to go anymore. And I figured, it's okay. They don't, they don't have to have me, and they shouldn't, if they think I'm, doing this. So, but yeah. And then, my dad was just totally disagreed with me. We met together as well about it. So as soon as I went through the history of Rome, he just shut down and he couldn't argue with me anymore. And then I went through a few other things and he was like, okay. And when I left, I said, Dad, I know you don't agree with me. I'm like, but, are you okay with me? And he's like, well, I'm proud that you're following, I'm proud I have the son that at least follows his convictions. Even though you didn't agree, but he also couldn't argue with me anymore. So, he didn't feel like there was much more he could do. So, and that was weird because I'd never been in a position where I'd had a theological argument with my father where I was able to shut him down, So I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot of hurt and pain there. But I'm not out to, get revenge on the church. There was a time where I felt like almost grace was my revenge on the church when I first started, because it was like, you guys aren't showing grace. You guys aren't practicing grace, all sin, all fall short. Where is this grace? Where is this restoration that we hear about? Where is this gentle, humble restoration that takes place, And
well, I wanted to ask you about that because you said, when you had the conversation with your mom, she said that she was afraid the church was going to destroy you the same way that they did her and your father.
Yeah.
And I wonder to what degree do you think the church is responsible to hold people accountable? Because your parents had an incredible following, and turns out that there was some malfeasance going on kind of behind the scenes. They had the trust and the loyalty of a bunch of folks. So with that great whatever, the old Uncle Ben from Spider-Man thing, with great power, great responsibility, that sort of thing. I mean, and I can sympathize with you, and I think that the church in a lot of ways does lack in a certain amount of grace. I think they can write people off. I have had, I've given the church reasons to write me off in the past, and have found that grace, and perhaps you feel like that hasn't happened. But I wonder, and this is gonna be my last take here, because I know that your time is running short. But I wonder, what do you think is the church's responsibility in holding people accountable, and in that situation with your parents? What do you think would have been a proper response?
I think a proper response was like, hey, we've got to, well, one is we need to hear what happened, what didn't happen. We can't just go by what the media said and things like that.
Sure.
Have a discussion. And I think there would have been some type of restoration process. Maybe not like you're going to get your church back or anything like that, but at least like, we've got to help you guys heal. We've got to help you keep your family together. We've got to try to help you keep your marriage together. We're going to be there through you with us. I mean, you guys have done so much for us. Obviously no one's perfect, and you guys got caught up into something, but we're here. And that just didn't happen, and that's the thing is like, but I did hear a lot of pastors preach sermons against my parents, even when I was sitting in there, because they didn't know I was there, even youth groups, And so like, if you've got, you got the time to give that word service. I mean, just to me, it's just so much of it's just talk, it's like, oh yeah, okay. And it's almost as like the lady do to press, what is it the lady does?
Protest too much.
Right. And it's like the church is talking about love, grace, and blah, blah, blah. But I went to Christian school. There wasn't a lot of grace in Christian school. And I went to a Baptist Christian school, and there wasn't a lot of grace there either, and you figured Baptists would have the corner on grace in some ways. And
we do.
And I was kind of being tortured by them, but because of who my parents were, by the teachers. And I'm able to be an adult now and look back and go like, yeah, that was inappropriate behavior from teachers, and how they were treating me, and that they were even allowing their own prejudice against my family to affect how they treated me as a kid and as a student. So, I've been through this stuff firsthand, man. And I know a lot of doctorates in theology people, and pastors who are really brilliant, who are just really not nice and don't understand grace anymore. They've got a head full of theology, but their heart's gone ice cold. And
I hope you're not putting me in that category.
I'm not putting you in that no, but I'm just saying. But that's the fact. Is like if but you shouldn't. I mean, and you're asking because we're on a radio. I mean, we're doing a talk show. Why? What would you think about what you should do with that? But we should be restoring people. We should be, restoring people constantly. We should be trying to do that and loving them and caring for them and building them up, and especially our own. I mean, when I grew up, there was a saying. Now, I always heard this growing up: is that the church is the only army that kills their wounded. And, to have that be a saying within the church, and if you ask most people outside of the church how they feel the church and why they left the church, it's not over theological issues. It's about how they were treated. It was how they were treated when they failed or made a mistake, or how they were hurt, or that people are saying, kick your kids out of the house. I mean, now you got progressives saying, don't talk to your parents if they voted for Trump. I just don't like scapegoating. I don't like that type of thing. I don't like kicking anybody out. That's just not how that works. And that's not my understanding of grace. Grace is, for me, grace is anarchy. It works outside of all of your systems. It works outside of all our theological systems, because it's for whoever, it's for anyone. And so the point is that, we always want to put an asterisk by grace, and that's just not, how grace works. Grace is unfair, and it's unfair for everybody. And so that's, for me, is how the concept goes. Anyway,
I love the taxonomy of what you mentioned with grace and restoration. Not a restoration to careers, not a restoration to influence, not a restoration to authority, but a restoration of people.
Well, and I think that's where me and Chris would agree, even on Galatians, is that, the idea is it's not an easy letter. I mean, it's a tough letter. It's a rebuke letter, but it's also the best book written on grace, So it's like you got these two things coming together. But he is confronting. You see him confront Peter. You see him confront Judaizers. I've even seen it in a slight way. He's confronting some of the other guys, going like, hey, you need to restore these people when they do get caught up. When he's talking about restoration, I think he's saying you need to restore people who do get caught up back into legalism and back into judgmentalism, because that's the thing he's dealing with there. I think he's saying you got to restore these people too. And when they do another gospel, you need to figure out a way to gently and humbly restore them, but not fall into the same temptation. So he makes it clear, like, don't fall into this other gospel temptation or this, legalism. But it's still a tough conversation. There's still rebuke there, but there's also healing there. And I think we're really good at the rebuke. We just got to get better at healing people and restoring people. So there's my 2 cents, guys.
That's a good 2 cents. Yes. Thank you very much.
It is good.
Quote unquote, Pastor Jay Bakker.
You're welcome.
We appreciate your time. Appreciate you being frank and open about your heresy. So people can never listen to you again. But we would love to have another chance to chat some stuff out with you. So again, fantastic. Thank you very much. If you wanted to, you could plug a website or a whatever, if that's important to you.
RevolutionChurch.com is what we've had forever. So it's RevolutionChurch.com. We're on Facebook. We have a YouTube thing. You can find me on Instagram. So if you're like, I got to tell this guy something, I'm on Instagram.
gotta yell at this guy.
Yeah, just DM me if you want. And I was going to say to Basil, feel free to, if you can, DM me Chris's information so I can stay in contact with him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we'll get in touch.
Beautiful. Okay.
All right, guys.
We'll let you get back to the California sun there, Jay. Say hi to Peter for us.
I will.
And we'll talk to you next time.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. Well, there you go, folks. That was Jay Bakker, quote-unquote pastor at Revolution Gathering in Seattle there. Remember, you can go to revolutionchurch.com if you want to just check out more stuff going on, and of course follow him all over the internet. And he's mentioned he's open to your direct messages. I would hope, that we can have constructive, the Ravel listeners would be more of a constructive experience with direct messages.
Yeah.
I would be very proud of that. I don't think we necessarily need to join the crowd of criticizers. But, I think there's a constructive aspect to, well, I hope that there's a constructive aspect to everybody on this show that we disagree with. And boy, was this a great test of that theory.
Yeah. I certainly had some points of disagreement with Jay, and you heard.
Sure, we all did.
You heard one or two of those. There were some more, but as he was a guest, I felt. It was my responsibility to let him talk. I have all the time in the world on this show to make any point that I want to. So gave him, as much time as he might need to make a point, and did my very best. While I didn't succeed entirely, to keep my mouth shut and to just hear what he was saying. But yeah, we don't certainly fully endorse anything that he said. But I think that one of the very beautiful things, as you were just saying there, Basil, is that even when somebody can disagree with you on some things that we consider to be very important, there are ways in which we all are human and all share certain experiences. And I think towards the end of the interview there, and what he was sharing kind of about himself, those are the types of things I think that even when you find yourself having fundamental disagreements about things that you might consider to be dogmas, if you're looking for, we focus on these areas where we disagree, and you're never going to win anybody over to the gospel or to your perspective in focusing on the things that you disagree with, but you find the areas where you can connect. And for me, that was kind of when he was talking about his experience and his divorce and all of those things. And he had this very vulnerable moment that he shared with everybody. And I think that all of us in our lives have these times when we have vulnerable moments. And those are kind of the times, those are the opportunities that I look for to connect with people, to kind of form a relationship in those sorts of areas, and then work your way out from there. But not to just start at the, I can't believe you said this, and then start disagreeing with people. If you start a relationship with someone disagreeing with them, you're never going to make any headway, and that's going to define what your relationship is about. It will be defined about, in regard to how it was started. So anyhow, just a kind of my own personal take on how you can kind of approach people with whom you might fundamentally disagree on some issues.
Yeah. And, there's one thing you can say about this podcast, Chris, if there's anything anybody can say.
That it's incredible?
Certainly, that it's, first of all, the best podcast in the world. Second of all, that we make the heresy hunters' job easy.
Yeah.
That's what we're here for, folks. No hunting here. We just invite them right on the show and just get to have a conversation.
We put orange vests on our deers.
That's a funny image. Wow. Let's all just take a second and close your eyes and just take a second and think about the image that Dr. This is the second time I've called you that today. Dr. Christopher Ryan Gates has given us of a deer wearing, a hunter's orange vest and maybe a little hat. And, maybe he's carrying a gun. That's kind of fun. What else was I? We're finishing a podcast here. Yes. So there's so many things that seem sort of fundamental to Jay Bakker's, I should just call him Jay. His name's just Jay. So fundamental to Jay's, I was going to say theology, but I don't even think that's the word for it. Just his disposition and the way he approaches life and approaches religion and the combination thereof, and his commitment to living out and embodying what he truly feels to be right is admirable. Whether or not you agree with him, his commitment to doing what he thinks is right is really admirable. And I think a lot of people can benefit from that kind of attitude. and, is his attitude towards restoration and grace of human beings and people. Of course, he had came to it in a much more sort of traumatic way than many of us have, is also really admirable. And, I think no matter what we think about sort of theological data points that we can disagree with, I think we can all agree that reconciliation, and especially with the Father and with God and with the body of Christ, is something that everybody can work harder to live out in a way that is truly revolutionary, in the way that Jesus was as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if I have much else to say about that. Any last points you wanted to address?
Well,
oh, sorry. I was just real quick going to say, as you mentioned, there were plenty of opportunities for us to cross the line in this episode between interesting conversation with somebody we don't necessarily agree with into full-fledged debate podcast. But we didn't do that. And a lot of the things that many might find disagreeable with Jay's theology are things we are planning on addressing in the future, in future episodes. So, if you kind of thought, oh, I can't believe they just let him say that and didn't correct him and didn't, lay out all the reasons he was wrong or whatever. Just keep in mind that a lot of those things we have plans to do full episodes on, and the arguments that he brought up, we hope to steel man in those episodes in order to respond to in a much more thorough way.
Yeah. And, I am never a big fan of, I usually don't like debate in general, but particularly when you have somebody on a show under the pretense of coming on to share their story. I don't like to surprise people, or, if you're not inviting them to a debate, don't like to turn things into a debate. And again, like I said, we have plenty of time here to make our own positions very well known, uncontested, and I don't have to worry about anybody else chiming in. I have the floor and I can talk about whatever I want to. So yes, we do have some shows that will be coming up that will address those things, and actually in the order of things, I believe, Basil, that we will have addressed some of the things, at least regarding homosexuality and things like that, a little bit before this one even airs. So this may be old news by the time it comes up. Might just take it out in post-production, but we'll see how it goes. But I do just want to thank Jay for coming on. I want to thank him for being vulnerable and transparent and honest and open with us in all of that and everything that he shared. And these are fruitful conversations, and I would encourage everybody to seek them out in your own lives and see if there aren't people. It's horrible to get in our little echo chambers and just surround ourselves with people who are going to agree with us all the time. So always fruitful to talk with people who are going to have a little bit different opinion than you do. Always take everything back to the text of Scripture. Take everything back to the Word. Take everything to the Lord in prayer. Be led by the Spirit in your study and in your prayer. And we just trust that the Lord brings us all to a place of truth. So there you have it. That's all I have to say.
Okie dokie. Sounds good. Well, thanks everybody again for listening to this episode of Ravel. Thank you for those who are leaving ratings and reviews. It's really helpful, especially on Apple Podcasts, but you can also do it other places like Audible, I think. And yes, it helps activate the robots, the algorithms to share the show. And it's a wonderful way for us to kind of gauge how we're doing or whatever, if people are listening at all, things like that. And so, yeah, if you could leave more ratings and reviews, we'd appreciate that. And as always, if you have any questions that stemmed from this episode, you can send those to contact@ravelpodcast.com, because we will be having an asked and not answered episode coming up sometime soon. And this episode did give me an idea, Chris. You know, I think we're having fun with different categorizations of episodes. Mm-hmm. I think it might be fun to like explicitly have the Heretic Hut or something like that.
Heretic Hut. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to think of another
alliterate it. Yeah.
H word. The House of Heretics.
House of Heretics, yeah.
Yeah, that way, if you're looking for a little bit of something a little spicier, you can look out for these Heretic episodes.
Yeah, as long as I get a rejoinder at the end. I'll give them the floor long as I get to debunk them afterwards.
Yeah, or during.
At least as we tend to understand it. And we will leave that for you to decide as the listeners. You be good Bereans and you go take it and decide where you land on those things. But I don't have any problem with giving people, a platform to talk about what they believe, so long as we also can respond in kind. So,
well, I think, I don't even think it's about platforming heretics or whatever crazy social justice words you were just using, Chris. But, it's like Jay was talking about in the episode, which is interesting because it mirrors sort of our philosophy for this show, which is it's oftentimes beneficial to listen to and hear point of views that you don't agree with for no other reason than it's A, keeps you out of your echo chamber, B, promotes honest, good faith discussion without the sort of sectarian sectarian triggering that can happen. Mm-hmm. And it's just it's giving ourselves an opportunity to think about things in a way that we probably never have, even if the end result is to strengthen our own position. It's still a very helpful experience.
Yeah.
So there you go. We hope you guys agree. We understand that it might be a little bit too stressful for some of you. But for those of you who are into that kind of thing, this is for you. And there you go. Again, thanks for listening to this episode of Ravel. And Chris, you have anything to say to the nice people?
Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to Ravel. To learn more about who we are, what we believe, or how to support this ministry, visit our website at ravelpodcast.com. If you have a question you would like answered on the show, or to let us know how we're doing, email us at contact@ravelpodcast.com. This project is made possible by the prayers and generosity of listeners just like you.
You sure don't make my job easy, do you?
Okay. You want to keep it rolling for the outro?
Yeah, that'll be good.